Welcome to Questions from the Closet. I'm Charlie Bird.
And I'm Ben Shalati. Each episode, we discuss a question that we commonly get asked as LGBTQ plus Latter-day Saints.
We're not trying to answer this question or come to a consensus, but simply sharing our perspectives. Today's question is, does accepting my orientation change who I am?
So Charlie and I are not terribly diverse, and we share many opinions and life experiences. For example, we both had code words for saying that we were gay.
However, there are some pretty big differences. For example, Ben's was a lot more creative and exciting than mine was.
Mine was Hannah Montana.
Best of both worlds?
Well, that isn't exactly how it happened, but it fit in later. So I'd come out to like just eight people. Then I went and lived in Mexico for the summer. And I would Skype with my friend Craig. And when I would get home from work, there was nothing on TV except for the Disney Channel. So I'd watch Hannah Montana.
In Espanol?
In Espanol.
Wow.
And I loved it. It was so funny. It's way better in Spanish.
So cultural.
And so I was like, telling her how much I loved Hannah Montana. I was like, wait, don't tell anyone about Hannah Montana. I was like, oh, that's a great code word because she gets the best of both worlds and she's got the secret that only her close friends and family know about.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
You can chill it out, take it slow, then rock out the show. That's the theme song.
There it is. It's good.
Yeah.
I know.
And actually, some of my friends, because I did not like the word gay, so I would say like, so the code word is Hannah Montana. And then when I actually came out publicly, people were like, so can we not call it Hannah Montana anymore? I was like, I guess we can, but we can just say gay now.
Do you still?
No. It's long gone.
It's been retired.
How did you code your orientation?
I didn't really code it. That this was kind of just a stretch for the for the similarity. But before I would like say it to myself, I would just be like, that thing. So it was just the thing. And I'd be like, God, you know the thing? Just take care of the thing.
Just take care of the thing. I was actually dating this woman once who was kind of bossy. Anyway, and I was like, I call it Hannah Montana. She's like, can we just call it your baggage? And I was like, no, we cannot call it my baggage. It's Hannah Montana. And she's like, I refuse to say that. I was like,
my
what?
Goodness.
This is my thing.
She sounds very nice. I hope she's listening.
She was nice. She might be listening. I doubt it. But
that's really
possible.
Funny.
We haven't seen each other in many years.
I'm guessing it didn't work out.
It did not. We dated very, very, very briefly. But that's actually a great story that we should talk about. No, I can't ever do that story.
Well, we like to provide a variety of voices and perspectives. And today we're joined by Derek Driggs.
Hello, it's nice to be here.
All right. Well, tell us a little about yourself, Derek.
So I'm Derek Driggs. I am 28 years old and currently live in Provo. I spent the last 5 years living in Oxford, England, while I was working on my PhD at the University of Oxford.
That's
very
super,
nice.
That's super fancy sounding.
It was
I was
really...
going to say, are you just stealing me? Because I'm 28 and I live in Provo.
And you went to Oxford
I
for
did
your
not.
PhD.
I'd like to go to Oxford.
Would you like to go there?
I don't know. Maybe we should talk afterwards.
We should talk afterwards. It was an amazing experience and I loved living in the UK. So
that's cool.
It was awesome. Yeah.
So what did you study?
So my PhD is in linguistics.
Oh my gosh.
That's how I actually first connected with Ben. So
yeah. So, well, tell everyone how we met.
So my PhD is in linguistics, but I do East Asian stuff mostly. So Korea, China, Japan. Ben did like South American stuff.
Yeah.
But we are both interested in language teaching. We both taught at the MTC for a long time. We both have interest in university administration, lots of things like that.
Cool.
And so when I was reading Ben's book, I was like, wow, this person is like so similar to me in so many ways. And I
just 10 years older.
Just 10 years older. And I would like to meet him regardless of the gay situation.
Of the Hannah Montana.
Which I wasn't cool enough to call it that, but mine was just being gay.
Wow.
So I did a really unique thing and I Instagram messaged Ben and I was like, hey, I'm a linguist too. And I want to chat with you about your life experience. And so we met up and chatted.
Yeah,
so
that's cool.
Derek came to my office and then we talked about linguistics for like a half an hour. I was like, oh, wait, we have to talk about you being gay too.
Right. Well, I assumed that he would guess that part based off of me reaching out to him in the first place.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you have straight fans too, but
I do have straight fans.
Most of them are moms.
Right. Not linguists. So yeah, anyway,
moms could not be linguists.
Moms and or linguists.
I know many linguists who are also mothers.
Wow, that's great for them. So I reached out to Ben and he's been one of my close friends since. So he's a great part of my journey. That's cool.
So when you came to talk to me, where were you at in your life then?
Yeah, so this was about a year ago, and I was at a point where I was finally starting to realize that this was something that I had to deal with. I knew that I was attracted to men since I was 11 years old, probably. But for me, it was always like, it was just something that was part of my life, but wasn't going to be relevant to my life story, because I knew that my life story would include following the gospel and finding a woman and getting married in the temple and having a family. And I felt very strongly about that. So the fact that I also felt attraction towards men seemed to me to just be another temptation or another sort of distracting aspect of my life. Mm-hmm. And so after my mission, I tried really hard to date women and dated a lot of really wonderful women, but every time it got sort of to a place where I felt like we were serious enough to move forward, I wanted to escape from that situation. I could never feel what I felt like I should be feeling, which I'm sure you can relate with.
Where did you go to undergrad?
At BYU as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when did you serve your mission?
In 2012.
Okay, like 12 to 14?
Yeah.
It's so funny because we were doing the same thing at the exact same time.
Crazy, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, so
Except that Derek has a PhD now.
Well, I only have a master's.
Well, I'm also not nationally famous, so yeah. I
But
haven't
you
written
were
a book.
internationally
Located.
Located. Good job. No, but I just remember like thinking about how isolated I felt, and I was like, I'm the only person in the world like me. But like, we were doing the exact same thing on the exact same timeline.
I think there's so many people that were doing that same thing, and not only were there so many people that were doing that thing, there are also people.
I wonder if we ever dated the same girl. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
Did you date cougarettes too?
I never dated a cougarette, so and Charlie never dated not a cougarette. So
what?
So yeah,
That's
I was kind of trying to figure that out. I felt like, this was something that I knew, but I would go back and forth on like, well, maybe I'll tell this to the person that I end up with, but no one else has to know about it. But I got to a point where I was living in the UK, and I'd been there for a few years, and I was dating a really wonderful woman, like the most amazing woman that I had met up to all the women that I've dated have been wonderful, but she was
a good match for you.
She was exactly. It just felt like everything was like designed like exactly for this fit. And so I felt like if I'm supposed to be with anyone, it's supposed to be her. And like we met in such a miraculous way. Like she's from Sweden, I'm from here. We met in the UK, and everything just lined up. But I didn't see the relationship building how I imagined it should build. She was beautiful. She was intelligent. She was talented. She was compassionate. She made me want to be more like Jesus. And I was like, what else could there be? Like, what else is there that I'm missing out on? Why do I not feel like I can move forward? And then I started to spiral in my mental health. And from there, I had to really start questioning what was really happening in my life.
So, Derek, it sounds like this was a tough time. Like you're feeling this hope about a relationship, and yet also, I don't know how I can move forward with this. Yeah. Tell us about your mental health during this time.
Yeah. So I've always struggled with anxiety, and I knew that about myself. And so I would always sort of put my relationship struggles down to my tendencies towards anxiety. I was like, well, maybe I'm just feeling like a fear of commitment, or maybe I'm just like fearing this settling down phase of my life, and that's why I'm not feeling like the good emotions that I should be feeling. But the more serious that I got in this relationship, the more depressed I started to feel, and I didn't understand why, because I had so much love and respect for this woman, but I just the closer things seemed like they were getting to marriage, the more I felt like I was just doing something wrong. Like it just didn't feel right. And I was praying during this time when I was struggling so much with depression and anxiety in this situation. And I was asking God to just help me find the next step. I was like, that all I've wanted is to get married and to have a family. And I'm very serious about my discipleship and following Jesus. And I just want to do what you intend for me to do, but something's wrong. So like, what's the answer? Tell me what the answer is, and I'll figure it out. And the answer that I felt was that I needed to find a way to be completely honest with myself. I felt like, am I telling the full truth to myself right now?
So there was like some cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
I was picking up on that. One, because it's relatable.
Right, yeah.
And two, because you were saying that like you knew you were attracted to men from the age of 11.
Right.
So was this a factor, like before you said this prayer and were honest, were you like thinking about that, or was it sealed?
I feel like I knew that I was, right. I feel like I knew that I was attracted to men, but in my mind, like that didn't mean I couldn't make things work with a woman.
Gotcha.
And like, I never really like connected the dots that this attraction that I had to men meant I was gay and wouldn't be able to work things out with a woman. I was always kind of like, well, eventually it'll click, right? Like God wants this for me. So
right.
Even if it doesn't work for other people, like I'm trying to follow God, and so it's going to work for me. That was like, I feel like the underlying mentality that I had, which didn't come with a lot of empathy for stories of other LGBT people that I heard, because I felt like giving them empathy would then give me permission to give myself that empathy. So I was really sort of, stuffing that down a lot.
So relatable. I love the way you phrase that.
I feel like probably a lot of us experience that. And so getting permission from God to be honest in this situation was huge. And actually the process from there was very quick, because that day I got a message from a dear friend of mine who was like, I don't know why, I just feel like I should share this podcast episode with you. And she was like, it's like a totally random podcast. It's called Questions from the Closet. And
oh my gosh.
I don't actually remember what the episode was, but
Oh my gosh, you knew about this?
yeah, she sent it to me.
That's so sweet.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't know why she's sending me this podcast, but this is a friend that I really trust. We had taught at the MTC together for years, and she's like a very in tune with the spirit type of person. And I sat down on my bedroom floor and I listened to this whole podcast just sitting there, and I was enamored because the stories that you, Charlie, and you, Ben, were sharing felt like things that I had felt. And I was like, wait, there are other people that feel this way. Like the emotions that I'm having are like shared by others. And so I spent the next week like binging the podcast and reading both of your books and just feeling like I didn't know that other people like me existed. And all of a sudden the door was opened to new information, and suddenly everything made sense. And I was like, I'm not just like non-committal. I'm not just like anxiously avoidant. I'm actually gay. And like me being attracted to men is related to me not being able to work out this relationship with a woman who I care so much about. And there's nothing that I can do to change that.
Yeah. Do you think there would have been a way for you to be honest with yourself? You said God was calling you to be honest and not say, I'm gay.
So that's a really good question. I personally think, so I am a linguist and I really believe in the power of words and language. And actually, as infants, our brains develop along with our language. So learning language is what allows the human brain to develop. And if a human is shut off from language, their brain will never develop, whether that language is a sign language or a spoken language. The brain needs language to develop, because as we learn words and we associate concepts with ways to verbalize those concepts, we build the neural pathways that our brains need to make sense of the world. And so for me, it makes a lot of sense that before I had the vocabulary to talk about this even to myself or to God, I wasn't able to be honest with myself. I could never explore this as an option until I was given the words to do so. So it was really powerful for me to just hear other people who I could sense were honest and weren't like out trying to tear down my faith, and they weren't trying to discredit the church. Because up to that point, much of my experience with the LGBT community had been people that were trying to do that. And so I had built this barrier in my mind where I thought, me as a believing member of the church, I can't have anything to do with these people. And that was just false. And so hearing those voices was incredibly important for me.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
That means a lot.
I'm glad.
That's so cool.
And I love a good linguistics discussion. So.
Yeah. So then I tracked Ben down, and it's history from there.
So tell us about how your identity, you said once you got that language, you were able to develop, right? What did that identity development look like?
Yeah, I think it was kind of scary at first. And let me know if I'm talking too much, but we
prefer our guests to be silent.
Okay. There's a really good book by, I think his name is Alan Downs, that my roommate introduced to me. It's called The Velvet Rage, and
it's so good.
It's really good. Yeah,
so
I'm glad
good.
you've read it.
It's a bit gritty in parts, but really good.
Yeah, so he explores sort of the experience. I think it's more focused on gay men and their experience, which is obviously relevant for me. But I think there's probably ideas that could be taken for any member of the LGBTQ plus community from there. But one thing that he talks about is one of the steps of coming out that I'm sure you've discussed on the podcast before, which is where as individuals who come out, we feel a need to really lean into that part of our identity and to like really identify ourselves by that thing. And I know that I have had friends and seen people and felt in myself that need to, okay, now I'm a gay person, to sort of change my identity to that. And so there was definitely this moment of, am I still me? Like, what about the things that made me before? What about my my image of myself that I've had up to this point, does that all have to change?
So, you're talking about these fears of like, okay, if I maybe super identify as being gay or over identify or like make that a core part of who I am, that might change how you perceive yourself. What were walk us through the fears you were experiencing as you were considering, who am I and how am I going to self-identify?
Right. Yeah. Well, up to this point, I had really identified myself as a child of God, a disciple of Christ, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as a priesthood holder, and really as a future husband and father was a huge part of my identity. I also identified myself as a son of my parents. I identified myself as a part of my groups of friends and as an academic. I mean, I had all these different parts to my identity, but I felt like if I opened the door to this other part of my identity, I was allowing all of the other parts of who I was to crumble, sort of. Mm-hmm. So if I said, I'm gay now, then what does that do to my identity as a member of the church? And what does that do to my identity as a future husband and father and as a child of God and as a disciple of Christ? So there was a lot of fear that those parts of me would be replaced by this new part of me.
It feels very mutually exclusive.
Yeah. It does. It feels like they can't be together.
Yeah, my process was much longer than what you're describing. And so I first came out to some friends when I was 23, came up with this Hannah Montana lingo. And then when I was like 28, I was talking to a friend on the phone who's a super good friend, very close. She's very active in the church. And I was kind of testing out the word gay in my life. And I referred to myself as gay just in this conversation. And she said, Ben, you are not gay. You just struggle with same-sex attraction. And as I started to use that word, it was like people were pushing against it. And so that also like made me hesitant. Like, is there something wrong in doing this? Like, if I do this, is it going to like not only change how I see myself, but how people view me too?
Absolutely. Yeah. I had a best friend during my undergrad who had come out to me as gay, and he was an amazing guy. We were tennis partners. We would go play tennis together, and he was Chinese, and I was studying Chinese at the time, and he would help me study my Chinese, and we would go get good food together and stuff. And he wasn't a member of the church, but he was actively investigating the church. And eventually he decided to stop investigating the church, even though he'd been coming to church every week for a year, and he'd been taking the missionary lessons and reading the Book of Mormon daily. And I asked him, like, why are you not going to investigate the church anymore? And he had said at that point, before I knew he was gay, that, Chinese people drink a lot of green tea and it's just going to be too hard to give up. And that really didn't line up with my experience with him, because I was like, I feel like you've put in so much effort already. Like, I feel like the green tea thing is doable. But a year later, actually, he had moved and he called me and broke down and said, like, I'm gay. Like, that's why I didn't join your church, because I asked Jesus that if he was real, that he'd give me the ability to join your church by taking this away from me. And he didn't. And so to me, that either meant Jesus wasn't real or he didn't want to take this away from me. And neither of those things seemed compatible with what I was learning in the church. And so I'd had this experience with him. And when he came out to me as gay, like, nothing about the way I felt about him as my best friend changed. And there was a lot of self-denial happening at this point, where I was like trying really hard not to relate it to myself. But I didn't see him differently. I didn't think his identity had changed. So when it's someone else, you can kind of see that they're the same person, right? But I also recognized that in his experience, this part of his identity blocked him from building a new part of his identity as a member of the church. And so that was just more evidence that these two identities weren't necessarily compatible.
Ben, something you said before about like this person pushing against the like label of gay. I think that's super. I love what you just shared. I like this conversation.
Oh, good.
I'm happy to be here.
I pick good friends.
Well, and as we're like thinking about words and linguistics, I'm thinking that words are placeholders for meaning, and oftentimes they mean different things to different people.
Totally.
And I know that. And try to be conscious of that. And so the preface to my book, the whole thing is like me explaining how I identify and why.
Right.
Because I also grew up with this idea that like being a child of God and being gay were mutually exclusive. Like, no, you're not gay, you're a child of God. And I've had like bishops and church leaders be like, don't say you're gay.
Right.
Because you're not.
Right.
Even if you have same-sex attraction, that like connotes some sort of like spirituality, religiosity. And it's interesting that like, for me, the term gay ended up being the one that fit the best because it was the one that like pulled me away from focusing so much on physical attraction. Because like with same-sex attraction, I was like, I am attracted to men. But, and I just hyper-focused on that and it stressed me out. But when I was like, I'm gay, it's like, oh, I'm attracted to men. And also like, it ended up being one that fit better.
Yeah.
It also was making me think of like, you know, the I'm a Mormon campaign,
I do know it.
which is no longer a thing.
Right. It
Because
was,
I'm a
though.
member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
But that doesn't fit well on a billboard.
It doesn't. It doesn't. So when we were like, those were like, I am a mother and a boxer and a
Right.
scrapbooker and I'm a Mormon.
Right.
And it's just so funny that like I could fit anything else in that sentence except for that
Totally.
word.
Totally. And I agree with you that words have so much power because throughout my life, as I made my attraction to men simply a sexual thing, or a temptation, it was like, of course, that's not part of my identity. Like, it's just a feeling that I have
Right.
that I don't want to have. And like, if I can overcome it, then it's no more a part of my identity than feeling angry is, or, feeling, I don't know, impatient with someone is. Like, it's just a human weakness that I can overcome. And so I didn't have to grapple with it as part of my identity, but I also saw it as really just a carnal, I used the word carnal a lot. I was always like the carnal man. That line in the Book of Mormon always made me think of my attractions. And so all of a sudden accepting that this isn't just a temptation or like a very limited sexual attraction, but that I am gay and my orientation is gay, meant that I had to accept that there was some implication for who I am and not just for a feeling that I was having.
It's also interesting to me that the only like person or being, I guess, that could unlock that was God.
Right. Yeah. Totally. If anyone else had told me, I would have said, no, you're trying to tempt me away from my path.
Because that like lack of empathy you had, that like not wanting to be validated, that it was okay who you were. At least for me, I relate to that because that couldn't have come from anybody except like the very top.
Totally.
I wouldn't have believed it.
When my best friend came to me and came out, it was like, that's fine for him because he doesn't have like the responsibility that I have on my shoulders. Like, he wasn't born into the church and he wasn't raised in the way that I am, but God expects more from me. Like,
where
God
much
expects,
is given, much is required.
Exactly. I'm like Spider-Man all the way. I was like responsibility, that's, I have a lot of it. God has given me so much and he expects me to live a higher law. So even if I share this experience with this other person, even if I'm not judging him for it, like, I have to judge myself for it. So I had a lot of that kind of dissonance happening.
I think it's interesting that you both said that you thought these were two mutually exclusive things, that like you couldn't be a good member of the church and be gay, or you couldn't be a child of God and be gay, and like these things negate each other. And just, that's a fear that I had as well. And I think a lot of people experience of, if I say that I am this thing, then I then can't be that thing. And so it becomes a scary thing. And maybe even a self-fulfilling prophecy of, okay, if I'm going to be this, then I can't be this other thing.
Yeah. And it also like that thought validates the fear that who you are is wrong.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Because we know, like, as members of the church, we know that our identity as children of God is right. So if we see an identity that somehow contradicts that, then it's not right. Like, we can't even consider that. If it takes away from my identity as a child of God, then it's not a true identity.
Yeah.
Have you felt that has happened? Has this identity of being gay taken away from your identity as a child of God?
Not at all. I think that anyone who's listened to the podcast before knows that hasn't been the case for either of you. But for me, I can honestly say that in the year since I came out to my family and close friends, I have had a lot of challenges, and there's been a lot of confusion and ongoing mental health struggles and struggles with the church that I had never had before that point. But one thing that I have felt continuously secure in is my relationship with God as a child of God. And that's not based on any of my own personal practices. It's just based on feeling his love and feeling reminded of his love.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So Derek, as you started to be like, accept your orientation, come out to people, it sounds like there might have been a fear, like, am I different? Are people going to see me as different?
Yeah, for sure. So I had another good friend that shared with me an experience where when he came out, he was questioned and asked if it could really be trusted that he was who he said he was. Because if he hadn't shared this part of him, then, what else wasn't he sharing?
Like he's been lying his whole life
Right,
about this.
exactly. Exactly. And even in my case, the people that I trust the very most in the world, my family, I hadn't ever talked to them about this because I didn't have the words for it. I didn't have a way to talk to them about this. And I was afraid that if I revealed this new part of me to family and friends and other people, then they would all of a sudden think that they didn't know me anymore. And I was like, well, do they even know me anymore?
Do I know myself?
Yeah.
So how did that play out?
So it played out in a lot of really difficult conversations where I had to talk to people close to me about these things and recognize the fact that we had different perspectives and experiences surrounding this part of life. And some of those conversations were uncomfortable for both sides, and some of them were confusing and hard. But I just felt throughout this ongoing sense that something about God's love wasn't changing. Like, God was still there in the same way that he'd been there before. And I started to realize that, like, a parent-child relationship, both with my parents and myself and my heavenly parents and myself, it's not based upon anything but parent-child relationship, right? Like, they created me. And suddenly I realized that creation wasn't like a contractual creation. It wasn't like a give and take deal. It was just a creation. And my understanding more about myself didn't retroactively take away from my relationship with God as my Father.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that, Derek. And what would you say to someone who was like starting to, be more comfortable with their orientation and see it as part of themselves, and they're afraid of this like pendulum swing from I'm not this to this is all I am?
Yeah. So I think a lot of us experience that, where we're like, I've had to suppress this part of myself for my whole life, and I've had to, to pretend that it wasn't here. And then we see people doing pride events and hanging flags and really, taking action to show that, no, this is something that I can embrace about myself. And it feels so liberating. It's like, okay, like this is something to be celebrated, not hidden. And I think that's incredibly important. And I'm so grateful for the people in my life that have made it clear to me that they celebrate queerness. And I hope that I can do that for others as well, because it gave me permission to not be afraid of it anymore. But at the same time, I think sometimes we feel suddenly this validation there that we haven't felt before in our lives because we've been ashamed of this thing. And so all of a sudden we can become hungry for that validation. And so it's like, now I have to purely exist in this space of queerness and be validated only through my queerness. And that's the only way that I can be validated to heal these parts of me that were suffering in darkness before. And I totally understand why I am prone to doing that. But I've also noticed that when I do that, when I base everything I am around this part of my identity, then it's really easy for me to fall back into patterns of shame because suddenly I'm not attractive to someone who I find attractive. Well, then that part of me is being invalidated. Or suddenly I, hear a talk from a general authority about this part of me and I'm completely invalidated again. Or I meet someone who says something homophobic, not in relation to the church, and suddenly I'm like, oh, the rest of society is devaluing me too. And it's really easy to fall back into like shame again.
Yeah. It's like putting all of your emotional eggs in one bucket.
Right.
And I remember when I first came out, I think it was probably jarring for some of the people close to me because, I'd never talked about this publicly or with anyone. And then that was like all I wanted to talk about because there were all these feelings I wanted to explore, all these experiences I had. And I just finally could talk to them and people were like, do we have to talk about this again?
And I think that's totally natural. And I think that that's probably a step that we all need in our development. And for some of us, it may last longer than for others. And I don't think we should invalidate that at all. And that being said, I don't want this to sound wrong because I can never take off my queerness. Like I can't take off being gay like a coat. Like I'm always going to be gay in every situation. But that doesn't mean that everything about my identity is focused on that. It just to me, a perfect world would be one in which me being gay was just part of me and no one gave it a second thought, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like that's the world I have with certain people.
Right.
Like with family and friends and people in my close circles, it's just like not even a thing. But like outward facing to others, it's like, it's my identifying factor to
Right.
a lot of people. And also Cosmo the cougar.
Right. Right. And as a cis white male, like throughout my life, the only experience like that I've had was growing up in a non-LDS area,
LDS place. Yep.
being identified by being
Where'd
a
you
member
grow
of
up?
the church in Colorado, where there's actually quite a few members of the church, but definitely it was my like identifying feature. Like
For sure.
when I met people, they're like, "Oh, he's the Mormon kid," and I really leaned into that.
Yeah.
And there were times when I felt discriminated against because of it, but I don't know that I had much empathy for people that are marginalized because of an immutable factor of themselves, an immutable feature of themselves. And so I've started to learn what that feels like. And the natural reaction is for me to lean into it more and be like, yeah, I am gay. Like, and that's what we're going to talk about today and tomorrow and the next day. But like I said, in my experience, and this may not be true for everyone, but for me, I've felt that when I do that, I feel further invalidation and further shame.
Yeah, Derek, as you've been talking, there are these big questions of, I've come out, so who am I now? Like, how do I rediscover my identity? As I accept my orientation or my gender identity. Like, how does all this play together? What I'm hearing you say is like you're the same person, you haven't changed, but maybe the way you view yourself or talk about yourself might shift and change based on the circumstances you're in.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think for instance, if I was left-handed and didn't know it, like my brother was naturally we feel like he was supposed to be left-handed, but even when he was in elementary school, like people would try to correct left-handedness, right? So there's some things that are just more natural for him to do with his left hand. Like I'm pretty sure when he throws a baseball, he throws it with his left hand, even though he does everything else with his right hand. And he might have just thought like, dang, like I can't get this right. Why can't I do this? But now that we understand better that brains are oriented in certain directions in terms of handedness, he's like, oh, like that's just like who I am. And so he understands that about himself. So further understanding about himself definitely gives him access to new emotions and new experiences where he can be like, oh, it's really cool that I, am naturally left-handed and that I've also trained my right hand. Or he can be like, oh, it's like very interesting that the brain does this in certain individuals. And he doesn't have to think that he's wrong. He can even be like, wow, it's so interesting that society is built for right-handed people. He has the ability now, though, to understand his experience, but that doesn't change who he's been this whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Well, and I feel like he could also like, along with this analogy, like advocate for like a desk for him or
Yeah.
like scissors
Yeah.
that work with him. And there's a lot, I feel there's a lot of ways that society is just not built for me
Totally.
as a gay person.
And for him, if he walks into a classroom and there's only right-handed desks and he's like, hi, I'm actually a left-handed person. And if everyone's like, oh, you're just talking about your left-handedness again.
Exactly.
Like, that's not going to be helpful. But if we can just recognize that it's not that he's focusing his identity in his left-handedness, but it's that he's expressing needs because of his left-handedness that aren't being fulfilled in the way that society's currently set up, then we can just get over it a lot faster. If we just bring in a desk for him, then we can get to know all the other things that
Right.
make him who he is.
Right.
Yeah. This is reminding me of a story that I might have told before, but when I was living in Tucson doing my PhD in applied linguistics,
Yeah. Good choice.
I lived with a really introverted person for like 4 months. And when I moved in, he like realized I did not understand him. And so he gave me a book about introversion, which was a super introverted thing to do, that I then read and realized like, oh my gosh, I am super extroverted. And like, I would have never said I'm an extrovert. Like it just wasn't language that I used to describe myself. But then once I understood that part of me, I noticed all this privilege I had as an extroverted person and realized like the needs I had as someone who needs to connect with people regularly and how I get energy from being with people. And so that like really helped me see myself in a fuller way.
Right.
And so giving words to this like personality trait that I have helped me understand people who are different and also helped me understand myself better. And I love this idea that we wouldn't have to focus on these things so much if it was just like a normal accepted thing.
Right. For sure.
In a strange way, it reminds me of the program I'm in right now because it's all based on like mental health and like therapy modalities and community building.
So cool.
And thanks. But it's not a
super cool.
PhD. It's just a master's.
Hey,
And I did do that same program, but like 3 years
Ben,
ago.
you're better than me.
I'm just older.
And I mean that. But one day I was just like, are you kidding me? I'm studying a profession that shouldn't have to exist. And I was like, I love it and it's so necessary. But like in my ideal world, there wouldn't be poverty. There wouldn't be people with attachment issues from abusive parents. Like all of these things that like we're trying to fix. I was just like, I wish this whole like gamut of jobs didn't exist because it didn't have to.
Yeah. And you're like, wait a minute, am I thinking about Zion right now?
What? Anyway, just kind of like random inserted thought.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing.
Yeah. And as we could like consider like who am I now that I've like
Accepted my orientation.
Exactly. The analogy I give all the time, and maybe I've said this before, is that we're all kind of like chocolate cakes. And like a chocolate cake has like eggs in it, it has flour, it has chocolate and salt and all these ingredients. But the cake isn't eggs and it's
Right.
not flour, but
Right.
together it's all those things.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And so, I view my orientation as like one part of who I am, but also an essential part of who I am. Just like being an extrovert is also part of who I am. And my religious affiliation is part of who I am.
Yeah.
And my gender is part of
Right.
who I am.
And maybe it's like part of the like baking soda, or is it powder? I can't remember right now. On
I
the
don't know
spot,
either.
I crumble under the pressure. Like the one that like makes it.
Pop.
The baking stuff. None of us are bakers. I don't know.
I do know how to decorate the cakes though.
Yeah.
And with that, I'll bring in a beautiful analogy of cakes are different
Oh,
shapes and
great.
sizes and decorated different
Yeah.
ways. And maybe you have raspberry filling and maybe you do too, because you also have a PhD in linguistics.
Or maybe no filling at all.
Maybe you just taste plain.
Maybe you're a vanilla
No,
cake.
yeah, I think that's amazing. Actually, I don't know where I got this, but I also really like to think about it in terms of, this sounds really like cliche, but a tapestry. And a tapestry is made up of like many different threads. Mm-hmm. I remember when I was living in the UK, I went on a date to this like museum with a date with a woman, by the way, with all of these ancient tapestries from like the night. I'm not a historian. I don't know what it's called, but from when there were knights.
The medieval
Middle Ages.
era.
Medieval ages. Yeah. So like there were all these tapestries and they showed pictures of events that had happened, and they're made of a bunch of individual threads, right? And I think about my sexual orientation as one thread in my tapestry. And there might be multiple threads related to it. Like I believe my orientation includes many different things more than just a sexual attraction, but they're just threads in the entire tapestry of who I am. And I've realized that like what I was trying to do for so long growing up was like pull out this thread from the tapestry. Mm-hmm. And what happens when you do that is the whole
Just, like,
thing
bunches up.
starts to unravel. Exactly. It all starts to unravel and it just bunches up. Yeah. You feel like less than what you're supposed to be. And all of a sudden the picture isn't there anymore. That doesn't mean that thread is everything that I am. In fact, it's a minuscule part of who I am, but it's an essential part of the structure of who I am.
So what would you guys say to like a loved one who has a LGBTQ friend or family member and they're concerned that person's like over-identifying with their orientation or gender identity?
I get it. That's a valid concern. Like people are scared of this. And at the same time, is there any other identity that you're afraid they'll over identify with? I don't know. That was a bad answer.
Just like,
No,
I
I-
kind of ask like why is this identity the scary one?
Well, I get why it's a scary one though, because that's the only one that I couldn't put in the I'm a Mormon sentence. And it's the same reason that your friend was like, no, you just struggle with same-sex attraction. Like there's this pull away from it because it is scary. And it's like the reason we thought it was mutually exclusive is because like we learned that from somewhere, right? And it was from the same types of people that we associate with and who are our family and grandparents and and I think it's really natural to be like worried about someone. I also don't know if worrying about someone is like, I don't know. I think this might be kind of tangential, but sometimes when I worry about someone a lot, it feels like I'm loving them a lot, but it's not like actually doing anything except just making me worried and making them be like, whoa, chill out, And so worrying isn't really love, but like honoring and educating yourself and being there for them is love.
That's really beautiful, actually.
And so like this person, if they studied Cass's 6 stages of coming out, they'd understand that like, oh, this is super normal, this is super natural. In the same way that like developmentally a child has like this behavior at this age, it's normal, you know, and you can figure out ways to support it, but also realize that it's probably not going to be like that forever.
Yeah, like this is like, well, being LGBTQ isn't a phase, like over-identifying or like really emphasizing it might just be a phase.
Yeah. And like you said, sometimes people stay there or it's longer. And I think it's probably, I'm sure a lot of people that think that I've stayed there for a long time because we do this podcast.
And they don't see the rest of
But they don't see the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Right. So the people who actually know me, this isn't my life.
Right.
You know, this is just like something I do.
Yeah, for sure. I think also it's like really natural for us to like feel uncomfortable when someone puts to the forefront of their identity something that we can't relate with. So for instance, a lot of the times we'll have close friends or family members come home from missions in our culture and all they can talk about is their mission. And they're like, well, in Germany, we actually eat this thing. Or like, German people don't actually do that. And like, that becomes everything that they talk about. And they're just like, we're like, okay, so are you German now? Like, do you have to talk about it in every conversation? And it can be frustrating for the person who's listening because it's like, your mission's over, like, get a life, you know?
So, Derek, you hate German.
I am German, actually, yeah. So, way to assume.
Oh, my bad.
So, anyway, yeah, I feel like that's really natural. And, like, it's like a social skill to read your audience. Like, for me to, like, if I was like, I lived in England for 5 years, and so all I can talk about is living in England. Or when I was in England, if it's like, I'm from America, and in America we do things this way. If all I could talk about was being an American. But the reason people bring part of their identity to the forefront is because they feel like it's unseen, and they feel like it needs to be seen.
Yeah.
Like the reason missionaries talk so much about their mission is because they don't have anyone to share that experience with. No one knows what it was like for that person to live in Germany for 18 months or 2 years. They don't know all of the struggles that person had, and that person is seeking some kind of validation about their experience. And so it can be frustrating for us because we feel like we're suddenly pushed out of someone's life experience because it's like, all you're doing is talking about this part of your life that I wasn't there for, when really they're inviting us into their life experience. They're like, I'm talking about this so much because I want you to be part of it.
Mm-hmm. That's such a good analogy.
That's a really beautiful reframe. I love that.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. So I think one other thing that I would say, not only to the parents of people that, or people that are worried about individuals that are sort of leaning into their LGBTQ identity, but to people that are coming to terms with either their orientation or their gender identity or whatever it might be. I just think it's important, and I'm not, in any position to give advice. I'm still trying to figure out all of this myself. But one thing that has been helpful for me is to look at my life holistically and to look back at my whole life and say, I honor the me that was focused on becoming a husband and father someday. And I honor the me that believed that marriage between a man and woman was the only right way to do it. And I honor the me that was a missionary. And I honor the me that was struggling with depression in that relationship, because they're all me. Mm-hmm. Like they've all built up to become who I am right now. And if after every paradigm shift I had to start over with my identity, I wouldn't have much ground to stand on.
That sounds exhausting too.
Yeah. It's like you have to rebuild yourself every time you understand the world in a new way. Then what's the point of the previous 18 years or 21 years or whatever? So for me, looking at my life holistically and being like, in that mindset, I was just as much myself and valid and deserving of love as I am now, but I just have more understanding and more context now. So I don't have to rebuild from the start. Like I'm still the same Derek who likes music and studying and friends and whatever. I know more about myself.
Mm-hmm. Derek, I was going to ask you who you are now, but it sounds like you just kind of answered that.
Yeah, I'm the Derek who likes music and studying and friends.
Same Derek.
Same Derek.
You rock, never change.
Yeah, right?
Like yearbook signing.
Hags.
Hags, right? You got it. That's where I was going next.
Yeah.
People didn't do that when I was younger. That was a later thing.
It's because no one had great summers when you were younger.
They were amazing. So, Derek, is there anything else you want to share that you haven't gotten to yet?
Yeah, I think that the last thing that I would like to share from my experience that might not be universal, like maybe not everyone shares this experience, would be that I just really believe, and I would like to be an affirming voice of this, that God, he's so much bigger than me, and like thinking about my relationship with him as like an adult to adult equal relationship is just so wrong. Like it's like an infant to parent relationship. Like he is everything. It's like Elder Uchtdorf said in a talk once that like compared to God, I am nothing, but to him, I'm everything. Like he doesn't expect me to be constantly on the same page as him. Like what parent expects that of their growing and developing child? I believe that God loves me and he loves me where I am and he loves me how I am. And I have to predicate all of my other religious experiences on that belief. And so I know that for many of us in this space, like our relationship with the church becomes fraught and it becomes really difficult to understand like what my place is in the church or like, you know, what I should believe about the church. But if we focus on our relationship with God first, then whatever happens in our relationship with the church, I really think it's going to be okay because God loves us and like he's going to take care of us. He's not out there to like wait till we get the wrong answer and then like we're out. Like he's our loving Father, and of course we have he has expectations for us and he has things that he wants for us, but like I just believe he loves you. Like he loves you and that's not changing. Mm-hmm. So as I think about identity, that gives me a lot of grounding.
Yeah. Thanks, Derek. That's beautiful. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your heart and your words and your mind with us.
Yeah,
It's
thank
been
you both.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. If you've enjoyed this or other episodes, please consider leaving a review, following us on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube at Questions from the Closet, or sharing this podcast with someone you love. And as always, please remember that we do not represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or Brigham Young University. We're not trying to be prescriptive or tell anyone what to think or what to do.
You heard 3 perspectives, and there are many, many more. We encourage you to listen to other voices and hear a wide variety of experiences. If you would like to submit a question or share a comment about today's episode, you can email us at questionsfromthecloset@gmail.com. Until next time.